Hello, everybody, and welcome to a new form of content for this channel, a podcast. Now, as you can very clearly see, the title of this podcast is Your Favorite X-Men. So each episode is going to focus on one specific member of the X-Men, that being somebody's favorite X-Men character, and I hope to use this episode as a sort of proof of concept, and then invite some guests on from the community to talk about their favorite X-Men member, why they were drawn to that character, and, some of the notable storylines, some of their favorite storylines involving that character. Today, however, we're going to talk about my favorite X-Men character, and so as you can also tell, there's no guest for this episode. Now, for the uninitiated, for those who have yet to begin their journey into the X-Men, or who are still very new to the X-Men, I think it's important that I give some context of who my favorite character is. My favorite character is Emma Frost, and the context I want to provide is just what her role has generally been in the X-Men historically. Now, let me preface that by saying I'm also very new to the X-Men. It's actually part of the reason I wanted to start this podcast, to hear from some expert fans and to learn more about this group of mutants who I've, kind of hopelessly fallen in love with and am very addicted to, and I'm just like, I can't get enough of them. So, I started reading comics when I was about 13 years old, and I'm 23 now, so that's a good decade. And somehow, up until last year, I avoided digging into the X-Men comics. Now, sure, I knew some of the characters, but honestly, I barely knew anything about anyone other than the hugely popular ones like Wolverine. And even then, I didn't know a lot of the characters' lore, I just knew their basic power set and, maybe kind of what their personality was like, but obviously it was being written as a character helping another character or as part of the Avengers or Spider-Man or something like that. Now, this all changed when I gave an X-Men omnibus a try last year because the omnibus printing game was a little bit slow. And look, here we are, a year later, and I've massively and rapidly consumed an enormous amount of X-Men content, all the X-Men content that I can get my hands on, and I want to be exposed to even more X-Men content, which is why I have this podcast. But let's get back to our White Queen, our Diamond Dame, Emma Frost. Who is Emma Frost? Emma Frost made her first appearance in the Uncanny X-Men issue 129, an issue which I proudly own. I literally just read that Grant Morrison X-Men, the new X-Men omnibus, which isn't even her at her very best, in my opinion, but I fell in love with her character there and bought my first CGC slab. And it was great, too, because that's also Kitty Pryde's first appearance, and she is another one of my favorites. And if you're semi-familiar with X-Men and Kitty Pryde and Emma Frost, you will know that there is an interesting history there that we will talk about, and I think adds layers to both their characters. We'll get into that shortly, but back to Emma Frost. Well, it actually does make a lot of sense to start with the history of her and Kitty Pryde due to the events which happened during both their first appearances, but I'm actually going to go back a little and just build a bit of framework around Emma's family history that was sort of added on later, her mutation, her powers, and sort of what I got was her initial ideologies, and then we can get into how they evolved over the years. When we talk about comic book characters and their initial economic backgrounds, you generally have two situations that play out. The first is sort of your Peter Parker situation, where the character has been burdened by life and lacks any sort of real financial stability, at least during their origin. With Peter Parker, they've gone on and they've given him money, they've taken his money away. I mean, such is the continuity of comics, right? You have a very wealthy character who comes from money. Your people like Tony Stark, or, speaking of X-Men, even Angel. I think heroes who struggle financially or don't come from the most exuberant backgrounds are most common. But the flip side of that is also a frequent occurrence in comic books, and Emma Frost is that flip side. She comes from a wealthy Boston family, and that's not to say her life hasn't been without its struggles, but that lifestyle foundation is definitely ever present. Despite the wealth, her family life was a huge mess. The focal point of that being her emotionally and at times physically abusive father. In school, she didn't do well socially, and She cultivated this relationship with the teacher, which also didn't turn out well, and that never does. When does that ever turn out well? But that's where she got inspired to become a teacher herself. Yeah, and I'd like to talk about Emma Frost's powers in relation to all of this too, because it's kind of interesting. She is definitely weighed down by a lot of personal trauma, which, it happens with many of our beloved comic characters, due in part to them being essentially because they're immortal and they live on forever in stories that are always being written, where they are always facing adversity on some level, at least. And so she's a telepath and digs through other people's repressed traumas all the time, to get the drop on them or for whatever reason, when she's got her own that are sort of building up in her mind and that she has to live with every day. And I don't have a complete thought or point to that, but I do think it adds something very metaphorical, I guess, to the character if you're picking up what I'm putting down. Let me define her mutant abilities a little bit better. Her telepathic mutant abilities. Now, obviously with telepathy, we all have a base understanding of what that ability would look like in action. Mind reading, I think, is the most common thing we all go to. But Emma's telepathy manifests itself in a few different ways. She can also do the mind reading, but she can also do these kind of psychic blasts that really disorient people. She's been able to turn off or block other telepaths' powers before. I think she even did it with Jean Grey once. She's manipulated emotions before. She made an angry crowd not so angry. And she can do this sort of inside your head illusion kind of projection thing she does a lot. It's all very cool when shown on the comic page, and I always love when telepaths fight each other inside their heads because it looks so amazing, and it's such a unique display in comic books, rather, like subverting from the normal kick, punch, all that. It's just these big mental battles, which, if you're familiar with like Charles Xavier and the Shadow King battle and how that's been depicted in comics of the past, then you should know exactly what I'm talking about. She also has a secondary mutation, which I believe was introduced in the new X-Men run by Grant Morrison that I've already mentioned. Her secondary mutation is her diamond form power. She can turn into a diamond version of herself. There's this great line in Whedon's Astonishing X-Men where she says something like, "I am by definition my own best friend." And I loved that so much, and it's great characterization for her. It's very clever and a bit cold, which makes a lot of sense coming from her perspective. Now, when she's in this diamond form, she is, well, as we know, diamonds are an incredibly durable and strong material, so she is much stronger and more durable like that. However, the downside of her going into diamond form is that she loses her telepathic abilities when she's like that, which I thought was a great addition to her character. It's added a lot of unique moments and adds to the strategy she has to employ when getting into battles. And also, she's a very fashion-forward character, and I could go off on a huge rambling tangent about her and her fashion, especially with the recent Hellfire Gala outfits that she wore. But look, my point is, her being able to put herself in this diamond form has allowed her to accessorize and, display her fashion sensibilities in a different light. And I literally never thought I would care about superhero fashion. But for some reason, the X-Men and Emma Frost have made me care more about superhero fashion and costume design and all that. But like I said, this is a tangent. Now that we've talked about where she came from and what her powers are, I think we can finally talk about her first appearance now and start to dive into how she's grown from that first appearance and talk about why I'm so drawn to this particular character. Let's get this out of the way, folks. As heroic and influential as Emma Frost is in modern continuity, she started out as a villain. It's a little more nuanced than that, though. At least it gets more nuanced as she makes more and more appearances. When we meet Emma Frost, she is a member of the Hellfire Club. Now, that's not the Brotherhood of Evil Mutants, but the name is still catchy. But, it's another conversation for another day. The Hellfire Club has its own separate and complicated history to it. But what's important to know is that when Emma is a part of the Hellfire Club, their goal is to sort of establish political and economic power in the interest of mutant supremacy.
This is kind of a common theme for a lot of mutant villains in Marvel, and I always have this internal conflict because I always really understand their perspective as a marginalized group in this Marvel world. So as long as they aren't doing genocide or committing to their goals through fascistic takeover or things like that, I don't hate them like you hate other villains, you know?
So, in her first appearance, Emma Frost gets into this sort of tug of war battle with the X-Men because they've both identified a new mutant, that being Kitty Pryde, and they both want to recruit her as a member of their own distinctive causes. Kitty Pryde, she feels a little overwhelmed and intimidated by Emma, but she feels a lot more comfortable and at home with the X-Men and is leaning towards joining them. So, Emma makes the best of a bad situation and does what any responsible person would do, and, she kidnaps Kitty Pryde to try to force her to join the Hellfire Club. But it is what it is. And eventually Kitty is saved by the X-Men and Emma is defeated. I think it was by Jean Grey, actually, who is, according to Marvel lore and standards, a stronger telepath. Though I'm rooting for that to change in the future. Sorry, Jean Grey fans, and, it's probably controversial, but I think Emma is a more compelling and unique character than Jean. So Team Emma all the way here, but that should be obvious because she's my favorite, so don't take too much offense to that. If you're going to take offense to any of my X-Men opinions, take offense to my distaste for Cyclops and how I think he's one of the absolute worst X-Men, but, I'm sure we'll get into that in a future video or something. Now, Emma Frost appears occasionally after the Dark Phoenix saga, and then starts showing up in New Mutants with her Hellions, which ties back to her being inspired and wanting to dedicate herself to teaching. Her Hellions are basically her version of the X-Men, and I actually really like this group and think it's a cool literary foil to the X-Men as we know them at this time, or the New Mutants. It's important to note too that I think Emma's a pretty good teacher. At least in the sense that she cares very deeply about her students and wants to see them become the best versions of themselves that is possible. Which, that's probably the most we can ask of any of the great teachers. And yes, she does kidnap the New Mutants at some point to make them into her students while Charles Xavier and the X-Men are in space dealing with space stuff. But, okay, yeah, so she falls back on kidnap for a while, but she grows out of that, I promise. And, kind of irresponsible for Charles and the X-Men to just, leave their New Mutants running around this mansion. I mean, Emma stepped up there, really. I'm framing this in a different way because I love Emma, but look, she grows out of it, like I said. And look, there's a lot of X-Men and Emma Frost content in between when she becomes a member of the X-Men and all that, which I haven't read. But I wasn't going to try and cram for this video. It's not what I wanted to do. I'm just telling you about what I've read so far and why I've been so drawn to it. I'm sure there will be even better Emma Frost stuff or more important Emma Frost stuff I'll get to in the future, and that will be icing on the cake for me. And, the only reason I'm mentioning this now is because we're starting to get into the more modern Emma Frost stuff, and that's where I really fell in love with the character. One of the most crucial things that happens to Emma before we get right into the more modern stuff, though, is that she loses her students, the Hellions, during some very explosive battles, and, she wasn't there to protect them because she was in a coma at the time, and it's just this very sad and very traumatic part of Emma's life that has followed her closely after this. Then there's some Generation X stuff where I believe it is her and Banshee teaching. I haven't read any of that yet, but it sounds like it's got some good stuff in it, and I'm really excited to eventually get to that and see the dynamic of those two interacting in a teaching setting, because I'm sure they don't exactly see eye to eye, just, knowing both their personalities. And then boom, my introduction to the X-Men. We're basically at the Grant Morrison new X-Men stuff, and this is where Emma sort of truly becomes a member of the X-Men, I believe. And she's teaching again, too, and having an affair with Cyclops, too. But, I'd like to see you defend that, you Cyclops lovers. Poor Jean Grey. Come on, if you like Cyclops and Jean Grey, you can't have like that, right? Anyway, it is really nice to see Emma teaching here because she immediately takes the Stepford Cuckoos on as sort of her proteges or personal student project type thing. And she still has a good relationship with the Cuckoos during the Hickman X-Men era, despite, there being some issues that present themselves in the Morrison run. If you know all about the Zorn, Magneto, Cuckoo thing, that is, which I won't spoil here because it's kind of a big reveal, I guess. I just wanted to highlight the Cuckoos because it's another great example of the heart of gold Emma has and how she truly is passionate about helping out her people in any way she can. And that's really what I find compelling about Emma, I think. She's got this cold exterior, she can be a bit snobby, she's got great wit and sass, she's an awesome business lady, she knows herself well, and despite all those things that would maybe sometimes paint someone as being sort of selfish or mean, she really, really does care about others and puts her life and livelihood on the line for it often. We are now at a point in Emma Frost's history where these become my main reading recommendations, actually. So if you've become at all just a little bit more interested in Emma Frost as a character, then yes, I say start reading with the New X-Men by Grant Morrison. You still get some of the trauma she carries, some of the resentfulness from other X-Men members and students at the mansion about her villainous past. You get the start of her affair and relations with Cyclops, and the introduction of her secondary mutation, which we've been over is the diamond skin. Her and the Cuckoos also become a pretty big part of the story. I will say you'll probably have to get over some edginess of Morrison's X-Men run. It's just a little weird and rough around the edges at sometimes, but it's from 20 years ago, which was a culturally different era in comic books. We really get some deep dive into Emma's psyche here, though, courtesy of Jean Grey, and we also get some of Emma's greatest roasts in this, mostly targeted at Jean Grey. They butt heads a bit here, and it's pretty fun. Next up, I would recommend reading The Astonishing X-Men by Joss Whedon. This is a great run for numerous reasons, and for numerous characters actually, but of course here we're focusing on Emma Frost, so let me say, if New X-Men was a great and fun exploration of Jean and Emma's relationship, then Astonishing X-Men is a very poignant and nuanced exploration of the relationship of Emma and Kitty. I mean, there's a lot to dig into and uncover there, as we've sort of discussed. Emma Frost did literally kidnap Kitty when she was just a little teenager. So all of that wraps up in a very satisfying and honestly beautiful way. And a lot of the Emma stuff in this run deals with her past and the villainous ways, and if they've left a lasting impression, and if she's had a true ideological shift, or if there's something more nefarious going on there. But I won't spoil any of those answers for you. But there are some other cool stuff in this run that I think you'll enjoy. Even aside from the Emma Frost stuff, like I said, like Colossus, Kitty Pryde stuff, the Danger Room has some cool stuff in this. We get some introductions of other characters like Armor. It's a good run, so I really recommend it. It feels like a movie. Now, my last reading recommendation for you might seem like a weird place to start, or, maybe not, because it's more easily accessible if you just go into your comic shop, but I've become very fond of the Krakoa era of X-Men, and was holding out for a long time getting into it because I felt I had a lot more older X-Men stuff to read first to give me some context to really appreciate the era. And now I've read a lot, and I couldn't wait any longer to start the Krakoa stuff, and Krakoa certainly did not disappoint. This is an insanely interesting era of X-Men that I believe you are doing yourself a great disservice if you're not hopping on to read. To get a good foundational grasp of what the Krakoa era is and how the X-Men play into it, you'll definitely have to read House of X, Powers of X first, which on the subject of Emma Frost, she does play a decent role in. We get the awesome business relations side of Emma in this, and she's, it's because she's dealing with the international trades of Krakoa, asked to by the main men themselves, Charles Xavier and Magneto. And for her hard work, she's given a seat on the Quiet Council, which is basically the governing body of Krakoa. So it's a big deal, and Emma Frost has really come a long way here and is a pivotal leader of the X-Men, I'd say, in this era. And if you want to see her and Jean Grey come together to absolutely wreck Sabretooth, then I highly recommend this book. It's a quick moment, but it's really fun. It's great. Any Emma moment in here is great, actually, and especially when she has to deal with political relations or anything like that. She's a no-nonsense lady in that regard, and she's got her cuckoos to back her up, and it is, phenomenal to read. Her and Kitty also have some awesome team-up moments in this, and there's a particularly satisfying moment in the Marauders with Sebastian Shaw I won't spoil, but yes, read House of X, Powers of X, and then for more Emma-focused content, along with Kitty-focused content, read the Marauders, and then you can even get up to reading the Hellfire Gala event, which was this amazing party Emma hosted on Krakoa. Everyone dressed up, it led to planet-sized X-Men, which has caused quite the stir in the Marvel Universe, and it was really just an exciting and fun event. So there's a lot of fun stuff ahead, and I think Emma will continue to be utilized in a wonderful way this era. Guys, that is going to be it for this episode. Thank you for listening. This is probably a lot shorter than some of the other episodes focusing on other characters will be. That's partially because there's no guest here, so rather than a longer conversational format, this has just been me lecturing you on Emma Frost, which I hope you found at least somewhat interesting. Please let me know your favorite X-Men character in the comments below. As I mentioned, I'd like to get some community involvement in this if at all possible. And if it seems like an interesting series people would like to see continued, let me know and I'll continue doing it. Stay tuned for more omnibus videos, comic book videos, and X-Men content, my friends. Until next time.